Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Lauren Izo. Coming up in this edition, Naftali Bennett or Mansour Abbas. One of these men could decide the result of the Israeli election. Donald Trump's Abraham Accords might still bear fruit. The Saudi foreign minister thinks peace with Israel would be beneficial for the kingdom. And thousands don masks and gather in Jerusalem to mark Good Friday and Easter weekend in the Holy City. Fourth time's a charm. That has at least been the hope of citizens around Israel over the last weeks as the country recovers from several elections that all ended in political deadlock. Still, there's no majority coalition, and it is still anyone's guess whether or not the country will do it all over again for a fifth time. For the first time in the country's history, an Arab politician is being called a political kingmaker after cutting off ties with the Joint Arab List. That means that his choice to go with Benjamin Netanyahu or Yair Lapid could essentially decide who becomes prime minister. In fact, a new survey by the Israel Democracy Institute has found that nearly half of Israelis, around 48%, support the formation of a government with the inclusion of support from Arab parties.
בשמי ובשם חבריי והציבור הערבי שבחר בנו כדי לייצר הזדמנות לחיים משותפים. כדי לייצר הזדמנות לחיים משותפים בארץ הקדושה והמבורכת לבני שלושת הדתות ושני העמים. בניגוד לכל הפוליטיקאים שעסקו במסע של פסילות מימין ומשמאל, אני לא פסלתי איש. הגישה שלי היא מה כן ופחות מה לא.
Meanwhile, there is another kingmaker in the mix, Yamina leader Naftali Bennett. While his political views seem to parallel the ideologies of Benjamin Netanyahu, he has vowed to not support the prime minister who is currently facing corruption charges, and over the weekend reportedly made progress in talks with Yair Lapid. But like Abbas, Bennett has made no clear decision as of yet. It's all a bit confusing, as Israeli politics often are, so let's understand a bit better by speaking with Ben Dror Yamini, political correspondent from Ynet News. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So it seems it's down to two kingmakers for this election round, Mansour Abbas and Naftali Bennett, but neither have said who they will join forces with as of yet. Pro-Netanyahu far-right Jewish parties have said they won't sit with Abbas, so how is it possible that he could be part of a Netanyahu bloc?
We don't have to take seriously every declaration, every promise of any politician. I mean, because if they will all keep whatever they said before the election, after the election, we will have no government, and we will not have only the fifth election, the fifth round, but we might have the sixth and the seventh and the eighth, and it's not going to end. So we have to bear in mind that one of them, two of them, three of them will not keep their word, and I mean, that's life, that's politics. So something eventually will happen. What exactly, we have no idea. I mean, we just don't know. We really don't know. I'm not sure that the politicians themselves, namely Mahmoud Abbas and Naftali Bennett, know exactly what is going to happen in 2 or 3 days. We just don't know.
So Bennett is reportedly considering a proposal to merge Yamina with Likud in exchange for going with that pro-Netanyahu bloc. On the other hand, he's also reportedly considering establishing a political bloc of right-wing and centrist parties. How can any of these options help Bennett perhaps eventually become the prime minister, assuming that's his goal?
Okay. It's not something new. I mean, I will not tell you news if I will tell you that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, they for a long time now want to join the Likud, because the only way to be a real prime minister, and not, because of the circumstances, is to join the Likud. For him, and to be the leader of the Likud, he will be one of the candidates. Maybe he will win, maybe he will not. This is the only way. So maybe, if the gate will open now, he might take the opportunity. We just don't know if it will really happen, because as we all know, he did not join the Likud until today because of one reason, because of the family reasons in Balfour Street, as we know.
Right.
Namely, the conflict between Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked and the wife of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So maybe something will change now, not because he wants to change something, but because of the circumstances.
Right. Like you said, there's a lot up in the air, a lot we don't know yet. Also, the president has said in order to come up with a solution, the politicians have to look for creative solutions in coalition building to hit that sweet spot of 61 seats. What kind of creative solutions might he be talking about that could work?
I have no idea. I just know that he, again and again, after the third election and the fourth election and the second one and the third one, he had a lot of ideas of himself. It did not work out. Let's remember it. So I'm not sure that he's going to interfere too much with new ideas. Maybe he will raise because under the circumstances, maybe we need someone, the bigger brother of the family that will tell the politicians, look, you must do something, and here are the ideas, and you have to do. Maybe he will do it again, but he failed before. We cannot forget that he failed a year ago and before. I'm not saying that his offers were not so bad, but they were not accepted by the politicians. So we have no idea if new offers will save something or not. Maybe yes, maybe not. We will have to wait. It's not a long time, because we know that tomorrow we have also the consultations from one hand, and the beginning of Netanyahu's trial in the other hand. So it's going to be a very interesting day tomorrow.
And if we don't manage to break this political deadlock, as you said, we could be headed to fifth elections, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. When does this cycle end? How do we break this cycle of elections here in Israel?
Look, it has nothing to do with yes Netanyahu, no Netanyahu, which is the main debate right now in the Israeli public, unfortunately. But we do know that without Netanyahu, we could form a unity government. I think that's what Israel needs now. Israel does not need to be dependent not on a party from the extreme left and not on a party from the extreme right. That's not what Israel needs. What Israel needs is it's really a unity government that will represent most of the Israelis.
All right. Ben-Dror Yamini, thank you very much for your input today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as time passes, in case you haven't noticed, news about COVID-19 has slipped further and further down our lineup in our ILTV Israel Daily. It seems the country's vaccination campaign is having the expected results. And other than masks, most traces of the pandemic are continuing to dissipate. Yesterday saw just 124 new cases in the country recorded. 4.8 million Israelis have been completely vaccinated up until today. While we still don't know when Israeli citizens will have to be revaccinated, one expert says it could be a while. Apparently, the Pfizer vaccine can potentially be effective for up to 2 years. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry's Director General said over the weekend that children in Israel could start vaccinating as early as this May. Pfizer saying last week that its vaccine shows 100% efficacy against coronavirus in 12 to 15-year-olds. Israel could begin vaccinating adolescents, quote, the moment there is approval from the FDA. A senior Saudi official says that normalization with Israel would be beneficial for the kingdom, but would depend on progress in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Take a look at a clip from an interview with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan on CNN.
I think normalizing Israel's status within the region would bring tremendous benefit to the region as a whole. It would be extremely helpful, both economically but also socially and from a security perspective. Now, that normalization in the region can only be successful if we address the issue of the Palestinians, and if we are able to deliver a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders that gives the Palestinians dignity and gives them their rights. If we can find a path towards that, then I think we can see a much safer region, a much more prosperous region, one where everybody can contribute to its success, including Israel.
Under the Abraham Accords brokered by former U.S. President Donald Trump last year, 4 Arab countries, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, agreed to normalize ties with Israel. During his presidency, Trump vowed that Saudi Arabia would join the accords as well. Now that President Joe Biden is in the White House, he must reconfigure the U.S. relationship with the Middle East and specifically understand exactly the role the U.S. should play in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, after the former president completely cut ties with the Palestinians. Now, under Joe Biden, the U.S. says they are removing sanctions from the International Criminal Court in The Hague, implemented by Trump, despite the organization opening an investigation into Israeli war crimes against the Palestinians. Over the weekend, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with Israel's Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, while the latter emphasized Israel's firm position against the court's jurisdiction. Blinken insisted that despite the removal of the sanctions, the U.S. does not support the claims regarding Israel. Meanwhile, Secretary Blinken reportedly also tried to call the Palestinians over the weekend, but to no avail. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas allegedly rejected the call over the weekend. It has been nearly 2 months since Biden took the White House, and the Palestinian president intends for his first phone call with the new U.S. administration to be a direct line with the Oval Office and Biden himself. It's easy to get lost in the dynamics, so let's speak with Yoram Ettinger, an expert on the Middle East and U.S.-Israel ties. Thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, since Biden's victory, the U.S. stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict until now has been quite vague. Blinken and Ashkenazi's phone call did cover a lot, but the highlight was that although the U.S. says they will remove sanctions from the ICC, that they still do not support the investigation into Israel. Isn't that counterproductive?
Well, it's counterproductive for the Biden administration and especially for Secretary Blinken to focus on the Palestinian issue following various peace accords between Israel, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, Israel, Morocco, Israel, Sudan, which proved everyone that in order to expand the axis of peace between Israel and Arabs, you have to bypass the Palestinian issue. And the litany of U.S. well-meant peace initiatives which failed because they focused on the Palestinian issue. And the bottom line is that other than the current White House, no Arab regime in the Middle East considers the Palestinian issue to be central on their agenda, on its agenda. And moreover, every single Arab regime considers the Palestinians to be a role model of intra-Arab terrorism and intra-Arab subversion.
So essentially what you're saying is that the Biden administration should not focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Absolutely. The Biden administration should focus first and foremost on U.S. interest. Secretary Blinken should not act as an honest broker. Secretary Blinken should act as a person who wants to advance America's interest. And the question is, would a Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, advance or undermine America's interest? And again, the answer is very obvious. A Palestinian state on the West Bank of the Jordan River would doom the pro-U.S. Hashemite regime east of the river. A Palestinian state based on the track record of the Palestinians going back to Second World War and since Second World War does demonstrate that the Palestinian state would add another rogue regime to the Middle East, advancing Iranian, Russian, Chinese, Muslim Brotherhood interest and undermining the best interest of the USA.
I mentioned that the Trump administration cut off ties with the Palestinians while Trump was in the White House. And now Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas actually rejected a call from Antony Blinken because he says he expects a call directly from Biden, just like Netanyahu got. Do you believe he will get that phone call?
Well, the question is, why did the Trump administration stop supporting financially the Palestinian Authority? Why did the Trump administration ended all financial support of UNRWA, the UN Relief and Work Agency? And the answer again is well known. The Trump administration preconditioned financial assistance to the Palestinian Authority upon ending terrorism and ending financial support by the Palestinian Authority of families of Palestinian terrorists. The Trump administration ended financial support to UNRWA, preconditioning future support upon UNRWA ending their own support of hate education by the Palestinian Authority and ending a process which would not solve the Palestinian issue, but would make the Palestinian refugees issue, but would make it an eternal issue. Sadly, the Biden administration has renewed financial support of the Palestinians and UNRWA without preconditioning an end to terrorism or end to hate education. And those two elements are the major obstacles to any peace attempt.
Well, clearly, we're not going to be seeing any peace talks anytime soon. Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
U.S. politicians are taking notes on Israel's security expertise, especially when it comes to government buildings. After a car ramming attack on the U.S. Capitol killed a police officer over the weekend, Representative Tim Ryan of Ohio is telling Fox News that he spoke with Israeli officials to learn from them about securing the Knesset and stopping these kinds of attacks, especially after the January 6th Capitol riots. Take a listen.
We had a call with the Knesset last week. Congresswoman DeLauro and I, and Jamie Herrera Butler, the ranking member on our committee, trying to see, what do they do in Israel around the Knesset? And is there something that we can learn from them? Are there other capitals around the world?
Well, Jerusalem got an early Easter miracle this week, the rebirth of religious gatherings, thanks to an aggressive vaccination rollout that's led to a steep decline in COVID cases in Israel. Thousands packed the streets on Good Friday in the Old City's Christian Quarter for the Way of the Cross procession, where worshipers retrace the last steps of Jesus before his crucifixion. Easter church services were canceled last year in Jerusalem and across many parts of the world at the start of the pandemic. Still, there are capacity restrictions for indoor Easter services, masks are required, and foreigners still need special permission to get in the country. Menno Kalisher is the pastor from the Jerusalem Assembly House of Redemption Community Center. Thank you so much, Pastor, for joining me, and of course, happy Easter.
Well, thank you very much.
So, first of all, it must have been a great feeling to be able to gather again to celebrate the holiday of Easter. What was that like to once again be able to be in the streets of Jerusalem after, of course, last year's cancellations?
Indeed, it's a joy to gather together to see the people face to face in the community, in the church, in the assembly. Indeed, it is a joy. We believe that God has a purpose for pandemic. If you search the Bible, pandemics always came when we as human beings do not follow God's directions and righteousness ways. And God has the way to bring us back to the right path. So I accept what God is doing, and we pray that the purpose of the pandemic will be fulfilled. I'm not arguing with God. God is righteous. Whatever he gives, we receive. So that's on that part. So how did we celebrate Easter and the Resurrection Day? We need to understand that all the feasts of the Lord, the appointed times of the Lord, are written in Leviticus 23. Remember, it says the feasts of the Lord, appointed times. So in these appointed times, God wanted to achieve something. And when you check what Jesus has done, he died exactly on Passover. On this day, he also gave us the unleavened feast. That means purity, the entrance into the new covenant. On Sunday, he rose from the death. That's the resurrection day. So what I want to say by that, the feasts which are written in the Old Testament in the Bible are served as a shadow, as a teaching mode for us to know what Christ Jesus, Yeshua, is going to do in the future. And when the appointed times of the Lord arrived, he accomplished it exactly on its time. So when we came to the church and we celebrated it, we studied the life of Christ, his resurrection, and guess what? If Christ won death, if Christ put away the power of death, this is the hope we have. If we just celebrate the shadow, which means the regular holidays, without the body, which is Christ himself, what kind of a holiday is this? I'll tell you a secret. I'm married to my wife, not to her picture. It's the same idea. So when these holidays are coming, when we celebrate it each day, we renew the joy to know that God has promised and God has done. He overcome death, and the same hope is ours to celebrate today if we put our trust in him.
Sir, well, I know the celebrations were almost back to normal this year, but I understand that pilgrims were still not allowed to join the festivities in the country. Is that correct? And if so, how did it affect the gatherings and the Easter celebrations?
Well, less numbers. That's it. Everything we do, we already transmit through the Zoom, through YouTube. So by the purple tag, as we call it, about 100 people can come in all the halls, not in one hall, according to the law. So yes, it's 1/4 of our church, but at least some are able to come. We do 2 services on Shabbat, so more people can come. The rest can watch through the screens at home. We simply enjoy what is available. We need to remember that the source of joy is not just to come to a building. God didn't save building, he saved people. So when we focus ourselves on the truth of the Bible, on the message of the gospel, that's our joy. I'll say it straightforward. Christ is our joy and not a building or just a gathering of people.
All right, Pastor, happy Easter once again, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
All the best. Yet another Israeli series is now available for the world to see. HBO Max started streaming Israeli dramedy On the Spectrum, originally from Yes, over the weekend. The international release date of the half-hour series about 3 roommates with varying levels of autism was timed to coincide with World Autism Awareness Day.
אני לא אוהב שכל כך שאומרים לי מה לעשות, ואני גם מעדיף לא להיות ביחד עם אנשים באותו חדר, אז אני רוצה חדר משלי, לא שאני חושב שזה חיסון. רגע. אני גם לא אוהב שקוטעים אותי.
In March 2019, the Israeli show won 9 Ophir Awards, Israel's top honor for television and movies. And Amazon Studios has also picked up the show to make an American version. No release date has been announced yet. Well, Israel's Independence Day celebrations are swiftly approaching, and this year's Air Force flyover is back on. Just like previous years, this year the Air Force will perform an aerial salute throughout the whole country as citizens gather on beaches and rooftops to watch the jets zoom by. Last year, instead of the usual flyover for onlookers, the pilots flew over Israel's hospitals to thank medical staff for their hard work during the pandemic. This year, the annual Independence Day flyby will pass over more towns than usual, according to the IDF, to salute all the citizens of Israel. All right, let's take a look at the weather forecast with our Chana Rifkin.
Hey Lauren, temperature lows this evening in the upper 40s and lower 50s, or between 6 to 11 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, Israel heading into a bit of a heat wave, so could turn out to be a beautiful beach day as well, with clear skies and temperature highs in the 80s, or 20s to 30s in Celsius.
Sounds like it's going to be a nice week. Thanks, Chana. And now, just before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. That might be the cutest thing I have ever seen in my whole life. And I think we're all tired of cat and dog videos. So this is a refreshing elephant from the zoo in Israel taking a bath. What a cutie. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.33 shekels to the American dollar and 2.65 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Lauren Izzo. Thank you so much for watching.